I would like to welcome everyone to I guess this is the August edition of Tennessee Turf Tuesdays. I'm Dr. Jim Brosnan and excited to be back. I missed last month, but I had a great fill-in. Tyler Carr, PhD candidate, who's here with us, filled in for July with Dr. Sorochan, who's here with us, and they focused on sports turf. Today is going to be a little bit different. This was a topic that was so popular in 2020. We brought it back. There's a lot of interest in Zoysiagrasses, and particularly Zoysiagrasses for greens. And Tennessee and Arkansas are kind of the two leading institutions that have been researching this topic. So we've got John and Tyler with us today, and then Dr. Richardson from Arkansas. Mike, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me, Jim.
Oh, you're welcome. Before we jump into this, the way this will work, we're found in doing these Turf Tuesdays that things kind of go best when it's informal and we just kind of have a conversation. So I'm going to kind of interview you guys and try to learn something about what you've been finding with the Zoysiagrasses. But a big number of our participants here are interested in their pesticide credits. So I want to go over all the details for that before we get into the technical content. For regular pesticide credits, Tennessee and all the other states that we have registered, that information was captured when you signed up for today's webinar. So you were asked to put in your name, what state you wanted credits in, your license number, all the particular details for pesticide credits. That's all captured and is in Zoom, so you'll be fine. The keys for you to get your credits, really there's only one. It's to stay with us for the duration of the hour. What Zoom will do, they'll track when you enter today's webinar and when you leave, and for the different states, they want you to be here for the entirety of the session to get the credits. So that will be tracked by Zoom, and if you stay with us, you should be in a good spot. If we have anybody from New Jersey requires one extra hoop to jump through to get pesticide credits. If you are from New Jersey and you need pesticide certification, I need you to send me a timestamp photo of when you logged on with your ID, and then a timestamp photo when you logged off with your ID. That's an additional layer for New Jersey only. That's only a New Jersey requirement. I should say that pesticide credits are for live viewing only. The session is being recorded. It'll be posted to our YouTube channel later on in the week. And if you are watching this on YouTube, there are no pesticide credits available for an archived viewing. It's only for today's live session. If you have questions as we go along, again, this is going to be very informal and kind of be just a Q&A about Zoysiagrasses and Zoysiagrasses for greens. Encourage you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That really helps us keep track of the questions, and it will also thread the answers. We'll do our best to answer them aloud, but if we run out of time or something, we can type the answers into the Q&A box when we're done. And then last but not least, if you are interested in requirements for the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, I will show that at the end of the presentation. I'll share my screen. I think that gets us through all the nuts and bolts, guys. So my first question for you is, what are you learning about Zoysiagrass?
Don't everyone go out first. Go once. We're learning. I'll start then. I'll kick it off. But Tyler's, I'm learning a lot from Tyler, and that's, you learn from your grad students, and this is definitely an example. We're 3-4 years into having our greens established at UT. We did some way back in 2010, diamond greens, but we're learning a lot, I guess, is what we're doing. And it's almost like I thought with the Ultrador Bermudas, the cart was put before the horse. These grasses were released and getting used by superintendents and a lot of trial and error. And that's kind of the case that these Zoysias are, but we're getting a lot of really good quality research done at UT. And I know Arkansas is doing some excellent stuff as well. And I think we're dialing in the fertility, the firmness of these greens, a little bit of mowing frequencies even. You don't have to mow them as often. And we're starting to learn this from trial and error, from golf courses that are putting them in, and then from the research. Definitely a lot is being learned rapidly.
So, John, I mean, I know when you all planted the first green at the research farm, it took a while for that to get established. And, there's superintendents that are thinking about potentially going down this road. Obviously, the time that you need to be closed to do it is a factor. And now in kind of the COVID golf world with tee sheets that are filled all over, nobody wants to close, and they certainly don't want to close for an extended period. Can you all, whether it's you, John, or Mike or Tyler, just let's kind of take the lid off the establishment piece and kind of see where we go.
Okay. Yeah, and Tyler's got some great stuff to show, and I'll go really quick on this. It's the return on investment. How much time can you be down for, and when are you going to do your sprigging? I'm sure Tyler will show some of this data. Our research green took a lot longer to grow in because we looked at 4 varieties. We had Trinity, Primo, Prizm, and Lazer, and they were all in replicated plots that were 5 feet wide by 15 feet long. And in order to keep them from growing in to one another, we were really slow getting them to fill in, so we could keep the edges clean. So it took us an extra year to get those in. So that wouldn't be a real case scenario, in my opinion. But we can talk about sprigging versus sodding. I think the sprigging rates, Tyler, you can expand on it, but we're thinking, you're probably looking at 1,800 to 2,000 bushels to the acre, not 1,000, which we did, which would be more of a fairway type grow in or something.
Yeah, in general, these Zoysia grasses are slow compared to Bermuda grass. Depending on your sprigging rate, I mean, a lot of people that are putting these greens in right now are going around 1,800 to 2,000 bushels per acre. We went at 1,200, and what we noticed is when it's warmer, they establish faster. Now, there's a trade-off to that with how slow they establish. If you plant later in the year, you may risk not getting it fully established that year. But if you plant earlier in the year, your course may be closed for longer, but you can still get it established in that first year. I know Dr. Richardson a couple of years ago, and I think that paper just got published, did some dormant sprigging work with a Japonica Myers Zoysiagrass. And so that's something that if you're okay with having a lot of downtime and really want to make sure that it gets established in the first year, dormant sprigging may also be an option, but that's something we haven't personally looked at.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that, Tyler, and I'm glad to hear that you're reading my papers. That's always a good sign for the graduate students. But yeah, I mean, I agree with the comments that John and Tyler both made. It's, definitely going to take a little longer than you would expect with Bermuda grass. When we grew our green in, we had one trial that was a comparative trial between Bermuda grass and Lazer Zoysiagrass, Tiff Eagle and Lazer. And it kind of like what John said, we had to kind of keep them apart. So that trial took a little bit longer, but the rest of the green, about 6,000 square feet, we sprigged to Lazer Zoysiagrass. We didn't get that green sprigged until I've got these slides over here, June the 20th in 2019. And we did not get full coverage by the end of the year. And I think we were right at 1,200 bushels. I'd have to go back and look for sure, but I think we were right around 1,200 bushels to the acre. We did do some lexicon pre-treatment of sprigs. If I can share my screen.
You should be good, Mike. You can share.
Okay, let me see if I can do this without screwing something up here. That's always a possibility. Yeah, I've already screwed something up. Hold on a second. I may just have to do this not in slideshow mode. Let me see.
20 months into this Zoom thing, and you'd think would all be seamlessly sharing, right?
You would think. So let's see here. Okay. Can you see that?
Nope. No, sir.
No? What the heck? I haven't used Zoom here in a couple of months, so maybe that's the problem.
We got it.
Okay.
It caught up.
All right. So basically what we did was we pre-treated the sprigs with Lexicon, 21 fluid ounces per acre. One application was made 31 days before harvest, and 10 were made, or the second application was 10 days before harvest. sprigs were harvested on June 16th and they were planted on June the 20th. We saw a nice response to Lexicon pre-treatment. This was done by Blade Runner and David Duguay, who I saw was one of the participants today. Appreciate him helping with that. We saw a nice advantage with the Lexicon. This is about 7 weeks after planting. And we saw an advantage at the later part of the year, but again, we only reached about 80% coverage by the end of that first season. But that was a pretty late planting date. I would say June the 20th is, definitely later than I would have liked to have done that, but that was just the way it played out in this particular case. And as far as the dormant sprigging, we've seen just great results for sprigging, like fairway or sod farm type Zoysiagrasses with planting in like March here in Fayetteville. But we have not attempted that with any of these putting green types. So we tried that a few years ago with some ultra dwarf putting greens, and we didn't have great success. It seemed like the kind of the diminutive nature of those Bermuda grass sprigs, those tiff eagle sprigs, they just didn't really respond as well to being harvested and planted in March as we had seen with more other types of hybrid Bermuda grasses or Zoysia.
Mike, what was your sprigging rate with this?
I think we were at around 1,200 bushels. As soon as you started talking rates, I looked at my slides and go, I don't have the rate written down here. I don't know what it was, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was around 1,200 bushels. Maybe David Duguay remembers. He was the one that provided the sprigs to us.
And I think that the 1,200 is probably accurate. I'm guessing David could chime in, I'm sure, in the chat window or the questions. I think in looking at the 1,200 versus the 1,800 with sprigging, that you could, I think if you're at the 1,200 and the right, and Tyler expand on this, the right growing degree days, the right temperatures, and 1,800 to 2,000 bushels to the acre, you can get them in 8 to 12 weeks and be at well over 90% cover and having greens established. But it's going to be a temperature dependent and sprig rate dependent for sure.
Yeah, similarly to Dr. Richardson with the Lazer Zoysiagrass in 2019, we planted Prizm Zoysiagrass in mid-April, mid-May, mid-June, and mid-July last year. And the only months that had full establishment were April and May. So we planted June 15th, and it only got up into the 80s, 80% green coverage. And I'm looking at a figure now for April to get to 95% coverage took over 16 weeks, and May took about 13 and a half weeks. So with warmer temperatures in June, we would have expected a faster establishment rate, but last year we had cooler temperatures earlier in the year, or later in the summer, early fall. So that really slowed us down. This year, we're kind of on the same track for April and May, but June is much faster than it was last year, and likely attributed to the really warm temperatures and dry temperatures we've had, or dry weather we've had recently.
So, Tyler, you talked about 13 weeks of establishment. That's a pretty long time. And Mike, I mean, if you had 8 and 12 weeks and you weren't at 100, you were at 80% covered 12 weeks after planting on June 20th. I mean, that's a pretty big chunk of a golf season, right? I mean, what are some of the ideas out there to try to make that faster other than increasing your planting rate? And maybe there aren't any, I don't know, but as courses kind of kick the tires on doing this, we can talk about the benefits of improved shade tolerance and cold temperature hardiness and the other attributes of Zoysia over Bermuda grass, but that seems like a pretty big bridge to cross in terms of how long you'd need to be closed.
Jim, I think that's a good question. And, it's a matter of educating the clientele, because we're talking maybe, let's say 3-4 weeks longer, but of how many years of a commitment you're going to have to these greens, and what's the benefit from having these greens. In the transition zone where we still have bentgrass golf courses, they seed mid-August, and they don't open up till around Thanksgiving. So it's even longer. They're going 3-4 months before they're opening up when they do these renovations and get their greens ready. So, I think we're talking weeks for several years out of these greens. The other option is the sod. It's a higher price and it's a lot of maintenance going back, but there's a golf course in Knoxville that I worked with at Avalon. They put Primo greens in this year, and they converted from bent grass to Primo. They sodded. The sod came in at 1/4 of an inch, and they only waited about 5 weeks before they opened up. And these greens were at about 160 when they opened up. Putting really slow, but it's Zoysiagrass. They're so durable, and people could walk on them and beat them. And just it was like, be patient. You can play if you want to play, but be patient. These greens are going to be slow, and we're slowly lowering the mowing heights. Now you're at a month and a half that these greens have been open, and they're down to 115 at a mowing height. So, it takes time, and it's a lot of top dressing to dilute the thatch that's accumulating in them. But this is number 18 at Avalon, the Primo greens, and that was a picture taken last Friday. So it's come a long ways. You can still see a little bit of the seams, but they're only 7 weeks in.
So John, wash sod?
No, they were growing on sand. These were growing on sand down. They came up from Pike Creek Farm in southern Georgia, and there's a sandy soil, cut as thin as possible. So you didn't bring up them very much. And what Mark Watson, the superintendent's been doing has been spiking them a lot, top dressing and diluting that area. So, and just some grooming, verticutting, weekly top dressing is what he's having to do as well.
Yeah, and it seems like one of the issues with sodding is getting it firm fast. With sprigging, it seems to be when you're ready to play on it, it's already pretty firm. But with the sods, it's cut really thin. You almost have to bury it in sand early and let it grow through so it can be firm enough to play on.
Right, but they're open. They're open only after 4 or 5 weeks. Not that probably early to be open in my opinion, but they were open and bringing in revenue because half of their business is public. So, it's the clubhouse people are coming and buying, the beer cart that's going around. It's a revenue to be able to justify paying for that extra amount of sod versus sprigging probably.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mike, on the fungicide side of things, has anybody looked at something other than just lexicon? Because one of the issues that I have with a lot of that data is that we only see lexicon treated sprigs, but we're not seeing any other fungicides being looked at in comparison to see if we treat sprigs with fungicide in general, they might do better than not treating them at all. Has anybody looked at any of that?
Not that I'm aware of, Brandon. I know Bruce Martin did a bunch of combination fungicide treatments on Tiff Eagle, I think is what that was on, or Champion, or one of the Ultra Dwarfs. And he did see some additive benefits of combining fungicides in terms of grow in that particular study. I don't remember all the details of it. But as far as I know, no one's has looked at that. We certainly haven't, but it'd certainly be an area of interest.
Yeah, for sure. I just think that looking at something more than just a single product would be advantageous, because I suspect that you're controlling a number of like pesky small pathogens that just kind of inhibit, delay the establishment of the plant when you're creating an environment that's really conducive for pathogen activity, because it's always wet and you've just got stuff munching on it. And if you've protected it, not unlike seed treatment for a seeded establishment, that it just gives you that added benefit of a couple of extra maybe days or weeks of growth that get you a little bit ahead of the curve.
Wasn't that an issue a long time ago, Brandon and Mike, with the Yukon Bermuda grass, seeded Bermuda grass? It had gray leaf spot. And so normally not a problem on Bermuda grass, but when they're seedlings, it was an issue. So I can see, a systemic fungicide like Lexicon or a Heritage or another product that's a QOI, especially particularly not being a pathologist, would be beneficial.
So another question for the group here, John, you shared a photo of Avalon, which is of course in Knoxville, which you and I and Brandon and Tyler are all familiar with. Some of our viewers may not be. They were a bent grass golf course, right? And now they've made the decision to move into Zoysia. Can you all comment on what's the right type of course to make a move to Zoysia? I mean, is it going to be more of a, you're renovating from bent into Zoysia? Do you think that this is as maybe the lifespan of your ultra dwarf Bermuda grass is kind of petering out, that Zoysia is a logical next step? I mean, it certainly isn't going to be a grass that fits every club in every situation. And your experiences looking at this, where do you think the initial fits might be?
I think it can be adaptable for high end or low end. So with one of the advantages of Zoysiagrass is it doesn't grow very fast, and so you may be able to get away with reduced mowing frequency. But what we're doing is managing it like a high end. We're mowing it at 115, rolling it 5 days a week, and it's firm and fast. Um, so I think it really just depends on um, what you want to do with it. From a conversion from bent grass or from Bermuda grass, I think you're going to have to spend some time beforehand. If you have Bermuda grass, making sure that it's all gone, multiple um, glyphosate apps, maybe even fumigate it, just to make sure that the Bermuda grass is all gone. And that may take some extra time, but if you're going to end up making the switch, it's definitely worth it.
I definitely seen it being for all levels of golf courses. You look in the Western Carolinas, I believe there's about 14 courses that have somewhere around there that have diamond Zoysiagrass putting green, and it goes from low end budget ones to higher end clubs. So I think there's an application, especially with the speeds we're seeing out of Tyler's research, getting up into the 13s and even 14s with these grasses. That was always an issue. But the shade tolerance, the reduced inputs, those are some of the benefits they would have over the Bermuda grass greens. Bent grass greens, obviously, it's got the heat tolerance with this. Avalon is alternating mowing and rolling because they're just, even at 115, they don't get so many clippings that they can put an emphasis on mowing and put their labor into top dressing and things like that. So I think we're at the tip of the iceberg of a lot to learn, but I think it's really applicable to all levels of golf courses for sure.
I mean, 13 or 14, those are big numbers. I mean, there's a case to be made that could be too fast for some golf courses.
Yes,
Particularly with undulating greens, right? That becomes non-playable or doesn't fit the skill set of the membership. I mean, that's got to be part of the discussion, right?
Right. And I think, well, Tyler, you can talk, your lower fertility rates are the 1.5 pounds we're seeing is probably too lean, and given those really fast speeds and the rolling. So I'd rather be able to have fast greens and dial back. We could raise up the mowing height a little bit if it's a little bit more nitrogen fertilizer to slow them down. Those are two great ways to, make them look better and to slow it down the speeds. But we were always concerned that the greens are going to be too slow, and that's not the case.
Yeah, that was definitely the issue with Diamond.
Mhm.
And yeah, now these greens are pretty fast. So it's just
Mike, these guys have been working with Primo and Prizm, and I guess a little bit of Lazer. Are you doing ball roll in Arkansas? Are you seeing 13 numbers of 13 and 14 too?
We haven't gotten that high, but we've certainly had numbers up, pushing 12 on some of our lowest heights of cut, and it's a very consistent surface, and so I think the surface is definitely going to be acceptable. And we're doing research plots, and maybe John and Tyler are better than we are at Arkansas, but I assume once these things get out onto real golf courses with real mechanics and really the technology and the know-how to really get the most out of them, I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be plenty fast. One question I would pose for John and Tyler, I think they're doing some of this as well, is one of the things that concerns me about these greens is how to keep them soft enough. I mean, our greens, they are hard as a rock, And, right next to the Tiff Eagle, which, you don't have to take a Clegg hammer out there to determine it. You can determine it just by walking across it. And so I don't know if that's going to be an issue is having to figure out how to make sure that these greens are receptive to shots, because they're very firm.
Mhm. Well, there's one cultivar in particular that's a little bit softer than the rest of them. It's still firm. Prizm is softer than all of them, and that may be something that's really popular because it's more receptive. But I don't know, as these surfaces age, they get a little more thatch and organic matter. Are they softer? It's something worth seeing. Because yeah, we're all dealing with very young services.
They are definitely firm though, and they're, well, it's a few years old now, Tyler. So yeah, I think they're going to continue to be with the current management practices of regular top dressing. They'll stay firm for sure.
Mhm.
So Tyler, to put you on the spot here, have you taken true firm readings or any Clegg hammer readings just to give the people listening any sort of kind of feel for what really firm might be?
Yeah, let me pull something up.
And you should be able
He's
to share it.
he's had me hit wedge shots into him,
Yes.
and I can hold them, but it's not you get a big first bounce, so you'd have to factor that into how you're playing a
You want
shot.
me to share your data here, Tyler? I've got it here.
Oh, the true firm data.
I think so. I've got a couple of slides here. Let me see if I can get them back up here.
Yeah, the 27 would be it.
Is that it?
Yes. So we're using Spectrum's True Firm meter, and this pretty much measures surface deformation. So it's simulating how far a ball would go down into the surface. So that's measured in inches. The higher the number, the softer the surface. So we have that number on the y-axis, and then all of our evaluations on the x-axis. And you can see that the gray squares, which is Prizm, is softer than, especially like way softer than Lazer, which is the blue diamonds. But there's just kind of our gradient, I guess, of how the surface firmness is of the different cultivars. And then we also have it compared to a Tiff Eagle and a creeping bentgrass green. That's not necessarily under the same management practices, but 0.54, 0.53, those are all definitely softer than what we're getting for these Zoysia grasses.
Yeah, and this is a picture of some data from last year that we did with a Clegg. And a Clegg is just the opposite of the true firm, in that a larger number is actually firmer in this case. And this was a comparison between Tiff Eagle and Lazer. And you can see that we were looking at about 20, up towards about 15 units, Gmax units higher with Lazer compared to Tiff Eagle.
Yeah.
So they're definitely firmer.
And Lazer, yeah, like I was saying, Lazer's definitely the firmest of them. So I don't, it'd be something interesting to talk to once courses have these more established, talk to players and see if that's an issue.
Yeah, because it certainly seems like one of those things you think you might want until you have it as a golfer. Because those are really firm. And I mean, rolling 14 with that level of firmness is, I don't think, going to be anything that's all that fun to play for the bulk of the golfing membership that's out there that is playing on the regular. I know, Brandon, you play frequently just like I do. I mean, that seems like it would not be a lot of fun.
No, that's way too firm. That's a big issue. The other thing that I see just putting on them myself is they roll somewhat differently to the way the ball rolls on a bent grass or a Bermuda grass in terms of the final terminal rollout of the golf ball. They're fast, but when the ball starts to slow down and enter that end of the roll kind of period where it starts to sink down into the canopy, it happens like really fast. It's very similar to the experience that I've had putting on fescue, where you feel like you kind of have to hit it pretty hard, and then you're worried that you've hit it way too hard, and then all of a sudden the ball stops, and you hit it the right distance. It's just it's an adjustment. You'd have to, get used to it, but that's another part of this that I think it'll be interesting to see how management practices kind of treat that as well.
So,
You don't get, you won't see the grain like you see on the ultra dwarf Bermuda greens. So that
Yeah, you definitely don't see grain.
There's definitely no grain at all.
No.
And if trying to get the adjustments to the mowing heights is probably going to be a challenge. Maybe 115 is too short. Maybe you get it up 120, 125, an eighth of an inch, and that's going to be a little bit more receptive to some of the more leaf material is going to be more receptive to the ball coming in. So a little less bounce.
So, kind of looping back to where we started, in an attempt to keep on track and move forward here, what I'm hearing you all say is things that you've learned is that it's really slow to grow in, and maybe an increase in sprigging rate upwards of 1,600 bushels per acre north, maybe even in the 18 to 2,000 range. We had a comment come in here with some experience that upwards of 2,000 made some sense. To make establishment faster. Sodding could be an option if there's budget to do that, to make establishment faster. And then once installed, there's a balance to be understood, not only with the superintendents that would be managing this, but the members or golfers that would be on these greens, that you're dealing with a surface that can be pretty firm and maybe too fast for the architecture of your facility. So that's all really good information. One thing I think, Tyler, you touched on a little is for those thinking about renovating, setting up to have a really clean renovation, right? Particularly if you're going to go from ultra dwarf into this. That's going to be a really tall order. I know that's something that Mike and I, we've looked at Bermuda grass renovation in a no methyl bromide world, and we've seen some advantages to phrase mowing with Roundup Fusilade apps in trying to remove Bermuda grass. That's all been pretty much in a sprig farm environment though, right, Mike? I mean, I don't know that you could come into a contoured green and do that type of physical removal coupled with herbicide. I would think you'd really compromise some of the movement of the land.
Yeah, I agree that, phrase mower on a green is probably going to be difficult to do a good job. But I would say that, if I were looking at a Bermuda green that I was wanting to renovate, I would say certainly a deep cut sod removal would be probably my first step, is to try to get as much of that plant material out of there as possible, and then you can come back in and add sand back and regrade and hopefully get a herbicide application in there. And so it's going to be a challenge if you've got existing Bermuda grass, even though I think, and I don't know if maybe Jim, maybe you've had some experience with this, but gosh, I've got to think ultra dwarf Bermuda grasses would be easier to kill than Tifway or some other type of common Bermuda grass, just because they don't have the rhizome structure that those grasses have. So maybe it's easier to kill these ultra dwarfs than it is other types of Bermuda grass. You got any thoughts on that?
My thoughts are I never doubt Bermuda grass's ability to survive.
Well, I'm with you on that.
Well,
and I think that the scary proposition here is when we think about kind of suppression programs and some of the herbicide suppression programs used in the japonicas. I know, Tyler, you've done a little bit of testing of this, and Mike, I think you and your grad student have as well. They don't set up as well for these dwarf type Zoysias. The Fusilade Turflawn app, we don't see the same safety that we do in Japonica. And I mean, Tyler, based on what you saw last year, you'd probably recommend Fusilade alone rather than with Turflawn, right?
Yes, anything with Turflawn, either Turflawn by itself or Fusilade, and Turflawn in a mix was pretty injurious to Prizm, Zoysia, and I believe um, Dr. Richardson saw the same on Lazer as well.
And John, you had seen that on Diamond several years ago when you were looking at, I think it was Diamond at fairway height, but
Yeah.
even then it was the
Yeah, it goes
Turflawn
back, is
Diamond.
Dustin Lewis's master's project looking at Fusilade and Turflawn and then the combination. And it was interesting. We found that the combination on Japonicas had a synergistic, it actually made the Zoysiagrass look better and had better Bermuda grass control in the Zoysiagrass. Whereas on the Matrellas, which was a diamond, the Matrella type Zoysias, you got more damage with that combination. And it was, the Fusilade alone was better. Not as good a Bermuda grass control though. So with that combo, and I think that's where we're at a kind of a crossroads with the labels on pesticide labels on herbicides is, you know, we've got things for hybrid Bermuda grass, common Bermuda grass, and ultra-dwarf Bermuda grass greens, but it's just lumps all Zoysia grasses together. That's like saying that's all bluegrasses are together or all fescues are together. But there's a difference between the Zoysia Matrellas and the Japonicas for sure. And then Lazer is a hybrid of Zoysia Matrella and Zoysia Minima. And I don't know what, if that, the Minima is even different. So we need to work with the, you know, the companies to look at relabeling all their products for the specifics of the Zoysia grasses, Japonicas versus Matrellas, in my opinion, because there's a lot of Zoysia Matrella fairways out there as well. There's a ton of Zoysia Matrella fairways. So it's just, we're ahead of the I guess the grasses are ahead of the science right now.
Yeah, I'll make one comment on that too, John and Jim. You probably know the labels of these herbicides better than I do, but I guess the good news is that most of these labels, there is no language that prohibits their use on Zoysiagrass greens, and there's no language that, you know, specifically states you can't use it on certain types of Zoysiagrass. So the label still allows you to use herbicides or even PGRs for that matter on a Zoysiagrass green. But my advice would be to anyone that's fooling around with these things is you want to have a test green somewhere that you can go out and play around with rates and timings and things like that, because we saw that with my graduate student Thomas Walton's study last year. We were comparing in a shade setting Tiff Eagle versus Lazer, multiple shade levels. And we were putting out Primo at 3 ounces was our rate. And I mean, the first couple of apps of Primo we made to that Lazer Zoysiagrass, it was not pretty. I mean, it was bad. And by that point we had really caused some injury, and we backed off and didn't spray it for a couple of weeks, and then we went back in with 1.5 ounces, and it seemed to respond to that much better. And then this year we started at 1.5 ounces on the same study, and it seems like it's not having, still seeing a little bit of phyto on it, but not anything like we saw last year, which was, I mean, it was bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that those are all good comments about labeling and lack of labeling. And, you know, we're piecing together information as we can slowly with repeated trials. I know, Tyler, the herbicide screens you did last year, you're going to repeat here in a couple of weeks. But I mean, those are even still 2 years of data at one location on one grass type. It takes a lot more to get something that we can have confidence in over a wide range. So your comments about test screens are well taken. Talk a little bit more about the shade piece, Mike, because I mean, it seems like that's one of the reasons why one might go to a Zoysiagrass is for improved performance in shade. I mean, what are you and Thomas seeing in that comparison with Tiff Eagle?
Well, certainly that's a big part of what we're studying right now, is trying to understand, you know, how much light do these Zoysia greens need compared side by side with an ultra dwarf Bermuda, because I think going back to some of the earlier comments, that's been one of the challenges, is that courses in the transition zone that have gone from bent grass to ultra dwarf, if they're an old course and they've got mature trees, the bent grass may have been fine in that level of light, but then the Bermudas are struggling. And so we've got a study going, and I'm going to just pull up a couple of slides here just to show this. All right, so is that showing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of the experimental setup where each of these shade structures has a strip of Tiff Eagle and Lazer in it, as you can see over here on the left. And then we've got 4 different shade levels. I'm sorry, 5 shade levels of control, and then 20, 40, 60, and 80% continuous shade. And then that's replicated. And then we also have some other factors in here. We're looking at height of cut, 1/10 of an inch versus 0.125 inches. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, Primo Max started out at 3 ounces every 7 days, and an untreated in each one of those combinations. So it's a pretty complex study, but we're getting some really interesting stuff out of it. So let me just hop over here to some of the data that we're really most interested in. So the way we do these studies is we track the photosynthetically active radiation under these shade treatments throughout the year. And then we generate a what's called a daily light interval that tells basically how much total light each of those treatments received on average throughout the year. And so basically a full sun day here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, we typically would get about in full sun, but somewhere between 40 to probably upwards to 45, maybe even on some days 50 moles of light. And so we have this range of shade levels that we're looking at here. And then this is basically just looking at turf quality of the Bermuda grass, which is the black line, and turf quality of the Zoysiagrass, which is the red line. And so the take-home message here, what we're trying to do is determine kind of this inflection point where the grass starts to fail based on shade. And so with Tiff Eagle Bermuda grass, we came up with a number last year. And again, this is the first year of the study, of about 32 moles of light is required to produce an acceptable Tiff Eagle Bermuda grass green. And so if you like to think about percent shade, that would be about 25% reduction in light compared to that full sun day. Now, the Lazer Zoysiagrass didn't start failing until we got over here around 21 moles of light. So that's about 50% shade. So the advantage was pretty significant in the first year of our trial. Now, shade it has cumulative effects over time. And so these numbers are probably going to shift some as we get into the second year of the trial, which we're currently in. So don't take these numbers completely to the bank yet, but there certainly appears to be a pretty nice difference between at least the Tiff Eagle and the Lazer in this case, in terms of how much light is required. So again, in those environments where you're dealing with an old club with maybe really, really large trees around greens complexes, this could be just enough to allow you to have good performing greens without having to do a really massive tree removal. Now, again, I want to point out here there's a point where they're going to start failing. Okay, so you can't just assume I can plant them anywhere, no matter how much light they're getting, and they're going to be fine. There's still going to be a limit. So right now the limit looks to be somewhere around 20 moles of light, which is not bad.
Mike, is there an easy way for superintendents to measure that on a green? How many moles of light they're getting?
It is relatively easy. There's a number of tools out there. If you'll provide I'll put my email address here in the chat. If anybody's interested in that, there are some relatively inexpensive tools that can be purchased to go out and actually determine how much light a greens complex is getting, or maybe the most shaded area of the green is getting. And I'd be happy to help anybody that wants to do that. Just work through those numbers to make sure they're getting a good number.
That's great, because I would think that as you kind of make your decisions about grass choice, that's a pretty important variable in what to select based on the configuration of the greens that you're thinking about renovating.
Definitely, the shade tolerance is definitely an added advantage that you're going to get with these grasses for sure.
Now, have either of you looked at cold tolerance at all and winter survival? I mean, that's another question that continually comes up when we talk about ultra dwarf Bermuda grasses, is the ability to get through winter. I know, Mike, you had some historic record lows this past winter and in Fayetteville. How did the Lazer do there?
Well, you know, we've got something that we figure we can just go straight to the bank with it. Let me get back over here and see if I can share again. Okay, here we go. All right, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can, let me see here. I'm getting the wrong. Can you see the full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, we did have an incredibly cold stretch of weather back in February of this year. You can see this temperature graph here. This is just minimum maximum air temperature for about I think that's about a 14-day period that I've got graphed there. You know, a couple of things to look at there is that, you know, we reached a low of about minus 18 degrees. It was the coldest morning that we had, but probably even more significant is that we had 10 days where we didn't get above freezing for 10 consecutive days. So it was cold. And so when we saw this cold snap coming, I told Thomas, my student, I said, go out there and I want you to roll the cover back on the last 5 or 6 feet of that Zoysiagrass green and let's see what happens. And so he did, and that's what you're looking at in this picture here. So this is our green over here to the right that we did have covered. He rolled this cover back, and then about 2 or 3 days into this, maybe it was a little longer, the really cold weather, we had about 5 inches of snow. And so Thomas, being the inquisitive graduate student that he is, he went out there on this corner down here in the bottom and he actually shoveled the snow off of the green just to see if the snow was actually causing some insulation as well. And so when it greened up in the spring, what we saw were pretty interesting observations. One, Zoysiagrass greens can die from winter kill in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So we know that for a fact, especially if they're not covered. The snow did certainly give us some level of protection, but not completely. We had kind of some weird patterns here. And I think a lot of this was that the snow was really dry and it kind of started blowing. The wind was blowing a bunch and it kind of drifted up in some areas where it was maybe thicker and some other areas where it was thinner. So I think, you know, my personal opinion with just this first observations is that these greens, if you get them far enough north where winter kill occurs on ultra dwarfs, I would have a set of covers for these greens, especially when we start seeing this kind of, you know, severe weather where we're going to be getting down in, you know, single digits or below zero or something like that. I would want to have covers available.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. You know, John Kaufman did some LT50 work way back with diamond and showed that the diamond Zoysiagrass and Matrella had slightly better cold tolerance than Tiff Eagle Champion, which were not different from one another. And then they were both had better cold tolerance than Sea Dwarf Paspalum. So the diamond has slightly more, but you still want to have covers for these greens. It would be my take home point, because we're only talking a couple of degrees Celsius for cold tolerance.
Going back to the shade piece real quick, fellas, we had a question come in about, Mike, you showed total moles per day of light. The question was difference between morning shade versus afternoon shade, or doesn't matter?
Well, you know, that's a question we get all the time. And, you know, I think that's more critical on probably bent grass than it is on these warm season grasses, mainly because I think you have more of a pathology component on bent grass where that morning sun really helps to dry the surface out. And then also bent grass has got a, you know, it's got a more optimum temperature regime in the morning where it can capture more light and photosynthesis because the temperatures are cooler. I think with these warm season putting greens, I think it really is just a critical number of moles, whether it's coming in the morning or whether it's coming in the afternoon. I think the plant can utilize it. That's my opinion, and it's not, I don't necessarily have a comparison of morning versus afternoon shade that I can back that up with, but that's just my opinion.
Right. It's important to get the cumulative moles, however it's achieved for the warm season grasses.
Sounds like another project, Tyler. Looks like you're not going to graduate anytime soon.
Just keep tacking them on.
We just keep saying things like because of pathology, and we just kind of keep moving on. So there's plenty of work to do.
I mean, would you agree with that, Brandon? I mean, just from a warm season versus cool season grass in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to the pathology point as well, I mean, we saw an area of Tyler's study area that just got absolutely smoked with spring dead spot, and we're still looking at it in August. And that's certainly not something that's going to be acceptable in a commercial environment as well. So that's, I think we all still have, the memories burned into our skulls of other grasses that weren't going to get diseases. And that was often because there was such a small amount of host tissue around that there wasn't a lot of inoculum. And once this starts getting planted commercially on larger scales, I think we're going to see plenty of diseases on the Zoysia grasses, and that's not necessarily going to be a sales point that it gets less disease. It's just going to be a different set of diseases that we're going to need to manage, just like all the other grasses.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's right. And we've learned a lot in the trial work that's gone on. And like you said, Brandon, as this gets out at scale, I think we'll learn more. I mean, another observation I've had from looking at Tyler's plots is, certainly there's a seed head production issue with these Zoysia grasses that remains unanswered. I mean, we have seed head production issues with Japonica type Zoysias that largely remain unanswered. And I think that becomes even more important when we're thinking about a grass on a putting green versus something that might be a fairway or a rough height. So certainly more to do. As we get towards the end of our time, I'm going to flip over my screen and put up the information for GCSAA, but to pay homage to one of my favorite shows as a kid, the Sports Reporters. Any parting shots from any of you gentlemen about the topic of Zoysia grass?
I think it's just exciting. I think we're gonna see more and more of these get in place, and we're gonna continue to learn more. And that's what's great about what we do as researchers. There's a lot to do, and I think there's a great application for this as well. So I'm looking forward to what we're going to see in the next 5-10 years with these grasses on greens in the region.
Yeah, and I think that these grasses are becoming something that people can get excited about. I mean, not to knock on Diamond, but Diamond wasn't what everyone thought it would be. Didn't compete well with Bermuda grass and bent grass, and these newer Zoysia grasses can. And so that's something to look forward to. And if we can dial in the management practices and especially the establishment, this is something that can really change golf.
Yeah, I agree with those comments. I'm excited about it. It's been interesting to watch and to study. I did a lot of work with Zoysiagrass back early in my career here at Arkansas, but it was all in sod production or fairway type work, and we still do some of that. But this is a very interesting surface. But there's going to be some challenges with it, and we've talked about some of them, and we saw a lot of seed heads this spring on our Lazer, and they were hard to mow, and I've got a lot of questions, and we probably need to be thinking about some collaborative projects on cultivation. Can you go out there and punch a hole in these things, and will it grow back in? in a reasonable amount of time, or what type of cultivation practices can be used on these Zoysia grasses based on their their slow growth, without causing too much disruption of play. So again, there's a lot of questions out there, and I'll just have one final question for Brandon. We've been really aggressively treating our Zoysia greens with fungicides just because we've got these trials in place and we don't want to take any chances. Have you seen large patch on these Zoysia greens, and when they haven't been treated?
Yeah, we've seen. I've seen large patch on these finer textured zoysias, and I've also seen. I mean, we've seen pretty robust spring dead spot. Tyler and I have talked about doing some work with that area that is we're still looking at. At least we know we've got plenty of inoculum there. We've seen one of my favorite diseases. Yeah, John, curvularia, but I prefer the Asian reference, which is dog's footprint, as the common name, but it's prevalent. So more of a cosmetic issue, but not unlike dollar spot. You're looking at it and you're going to have questions about what are all these dark spots on a green kind of thing. So it's going to need to be managed. You can get dollar spot on zoysias, so that's certainly possible. The other rhizoctonias, so not just solani from large patch, but some of the other rhizoctonias could certainly be an issue. And if you look at the diseases that exist over in areas where this grows more natively, you're going to find plenty of diseases to work on. So I will not be surprised if we have to have a robust program that may be more similar to the warm season grasses in terms of what we need to do, but it won't be as bad as what we might see on something like bent grass. Well, it'll be more comparable to what we have with Bermuda grass.
Well, I think that this will be a topic on not only the Turf Tuesday program, but probably turf conference and education programs for a long time as we learn more. For those superintendents that have participated today, this is your information for GCSAA, your event approval code for the GCSAA website. Make sure if you are watching this on YouTube that you list this event date, August 3rd, when you put this into GCSAA's website, and not the date that you watched it on YouTube. And with that, I think we're about wrapped up. I'd like to thank Dr. Richardson from Arkansas for being here, as well as my colleagues from Tennessee, John, Brandon, and Tyler. Hope that you can join us for the next Turf Tuesday in September. We're going to be a little later in the month because the first Tuesday of the month is right after Labor Day. So we're going to be the week after that. And it's going to be another fun one. We're going to have some special guests. Dr. Jim Kearns from North Carolina State and Dr. Joe Roberts from Clemson University are going to join our own Dr. Horvath and talk about everything that they saw in the wild world of disease this summer on all sorts of grasses. So definitely tune in for that, and look forward to seeing everyone in September. Enjoy the